Lisa Peterson here. Today I am talking about The Fourth Turning is Here by Neil Howe, how it relates to current events, economics, monetary supply, personal thoughts, all in one place. So if you've been curious about this book or you've already read it and you want to just hear about somebody else's experiences, then stay with me because I think this is going to be very interesting and I can't wait to hear your comments and thoughts and questions. So before we dive into Neil Howe's theory, I want to share why this book resonates with me on a personal level. And as someone who has been observing our political and economic systems closely since I think I finished my MBA in 1992, I've come to a sobering conclusion that the American experiment is at a critical inflection point. I think because I thought that, that's why this book is so interesting to me. I also want to say that my criticism isn't directed at any single administration. Both political parties have fundamentally failed the average American by prioritizing money and power over public welfare. And I feel like the political system has surrendered our values to profit above all else. And what we're experiencing right now is not just normal political dysfunction, it's the culmination of decades of corruption and distortion. And we've constructed an economic reality that I think defies natural market forces. And I struggle because of that. So this distortion exists because a capitalistic class and its supporting system openly takes advantage, I think, of its workers without meaningful governance. I think that we are totally set up to support the richest in our society, but not everyone else. And I do have concerns that what's happening right now is actually dismantling what little safety nets we do have in the United States. And that's very frustrating to me because I feel like government is created to support all of us, not just the wealthy billionaires. That is a big thought behind what I'm about to share with you. So if you don't believe in that or you don't share that belief, then you can go somewhere else. But that's where this is coming from. When I first encountered this book and his cyclical theory of history in his book Generations, that he co-wrote with William Strauss, back maybe in the 80s. It's been a long time. Provided a framework that helped explain what we're witnessing now, not just temporary political disagreement, but ending of one era and the painful birth of another. The systems that have failed us are breaking down exactly as Howe predicted they would. And so he wrote a book in 1997 called The Fourth Turning is the book before this one. He wrote The Fourth Turning. And that one made some pretty bold predictions about a major crisis hitting America around the 2020s. And so here we are. What makes this book really interesting is that he has been tracking these patterns for decades, and many believe his predictions from the 90s are now coming true. And this book really confirms that. So the whole concept is based on a theory, seasons of history, and it's surprisingly simple. History moves in cycles, roughly 80 to 100 years, which he calls a saeculum. And each saeculum has four distinct phases or turnings that last about 20 to 25 years each. The first turning is a period of rebuilding and optimism after a crisis. The second turning is a time of cultural and spiritual renewal. The third turning is when institutions weaken and individualism rises. And then the fourth turning is a period of destruction and rebuilding of social order. So we're in the fourth turning right now. These are based on generational archetypes, with each generation playing a specific role depending on their age during the crisis. So when we look at what's happening right now, we've got the boomers in their elder years. They are serving with moral leadership. Gen X, which I'm a part of, the nomad generation, he calls us, is in midlife during the crisis, and we're providing pragmatic leadership. And then the next generation, Millennials, is young adults during the crisis providing collective action. And then the homeland Gen Z generation, children during crisis shaped by the events that are occurring. So now we're going to talk about the current crisis. According to Howe, we are in the winter season of this current fourth turning. He points to various symptoms of our national malaise, which I'm sure will resonate: government dysfunction and gridlock, collapsing public trust in institutions, extreme partisan division, economic inequality, declining public health, moral and legal chaos, gender conflicts, and declining birth rates and family formation. In this book is sometime before the mid 2030s, America will pass through a great gate in history. And during this period, he warns about political insurrection, civil conflict, geographic fracturing, and even authoritarian rule. He suggests that a major foreign war is highly likely and possibly one requiring total national mobilization. Okay. I will say that when I was reading this book, often I read before bed, and I found out in the middle of the book when he's talking about civil war that it definitely was not good to read this before bed because it affected my sleep and the dreams that I was having, because he goes through and shows you the past crises that have happened, right? So the Great Depression and all of the events around that, the Civil War, and before that, he's got other past historical events, but I'd say that those two are the most pressing examples of what it looks like when a society is crumbling and the old patterns and paradigms and way of being and society is no longer serving its people, which is pretty much where we're at. And I think that's a very powerful part of what he's talking about. The critiques that I would have about his approach rushes through, I feel like, the difficult crisis, and he spends a lot of time at the end of the book with very overly confident predictions. He's making the statement about what will happen rather than what might happen, and he declares with great certainty how the homeland generation will behave in the future without substantial evidence of what they're actually going to do and how they're going to respond to the crisis and the rebuilding after the crisis. He also cherry picks evidence. So at times he seems to search for historical examples that fit his theory while ignoring contradictory evidence. For instance, he claims gender roles always loosen before a crisis and tighten during one, but doesn't provide a lot of historical examples to support that pattern. He definitely has a technology blind spot. He doesn't adequately address how modern technology, especially AI and things like cryptocurrency, might fundamentally alter these historical patterns. Previous crises didn't have AI, social media, nuclear weapons. And so these factors could dramatically change how a modern crisis unfolds. And then finally, he overlooks other causal factors. Sometimes the book attributes historical events primarily to generational cycles while minimizing like other crucial factors like technological innovation, economic structures, resource constraints. Like he doesn't get into that. And it's already a really, really long book, and it already gets pretty technical, so I can understand why he might not be able to explore all of those things. So next we come into the coming crisis, and despite the flaws or the criticisms that I have, his scenarios are very thought-provoking. He outlines three possibilities. Number one, a financial crisis. So building on the 2008 financial crisis and crash and recent economic turbulence, he suggests that there's another potentially more severe financial collapse that could trigger the climax of the fourth turning, with what is happening right now with the tariffs and the tariff wars and the trade. like that could actually be expediting. So while Howe was thinking this is maybe not till 2030s, it feels like what we're having happen in 2025 could exacerbate this faster, could speed up the process and lead to a financial crisis that is the thing that triggers the climax of the fourth turning. Civil conflict with political polarization at such extreme levels. He warns about potential civil strife that could tear at the nation's fabric. I totally feel that that is happening right now. He also talks about world war. A major international conflict, possibly involving China, could unite Americans against an existential threat. But absent from his analysis is the possibility of a revolution, an uprising against the elite, rather than a horizontal conflict between equal factions, or even a less violent transition that could involve war. He doesn't fully account for how things like climate change or resource depletion might shape our crisis either. But the next thing is like the generational roles in the crisis. And he has some insights about how each generation might navigate the coming storm. He feels like the boomers, which he calls the prophet generation, will provide like moral guidance and define values of the crisis and maybe contribute financially and remain culturally influential through the crisis and set the banner under which younger generations can march. I don't know on that one. I have to say, boomers have been very divisive, just like the rest of society. I don't think they fall into any one camp. So I'm not sure how that will look. But Generation X, which, like I said, I'm part of, I thought it was very interesting, the nomad generation. He says that our skepticism and pragmatism will become valuable national resources, that we will be able to provide practical leadership in institutions with entrepreneurship. And he feels like our toughness and realism has been criticized in the past will actually become essential. And a lot of this has to do with my generation was when women were going to work in the 60s and 70s, and where we had to find our way home by ourselves. We weren't being picked up. We were left on our own quite a bit and had to sort of muster through and toughen up and figure things out on our own. And that will really show up as an important, essential skill for our generation to make a difference in the midst of the crisis. Then he goes on to talk about millennials, which he calls the hero generation, and that group will unite in collective action to address the crisis, will be characterized by compliance with authority and teamwork, which I don't know if I totally understand that, but may accept militarized mass violence while rejecting personal violence. And then Gen Z homelanders, he calls the artist generation, will absorb the lessons of the crisis during their formative years, will come of age during the rebuilding process, and then will push boundaries and establish new values during the spring period. So after the winter has ended, the spring begins, and they will be very, very influential in creating this new society that benefits all, because he does talk a lot about that, which leads to the coming spring. And this is where I feel like he can be overly optimistic, but he does try to paint a very positive picture, his conviction that after the crisis will come a renewal, according to his theory that it will bring renewed community bonds and civic engagement, new moral consensus and shared values, economic revival with lower inequality, religious and spiritual renewal, restored trust in institutions, return to family formation and a baby boom, and lower crime and higher social trust. Now, from where we sit right now, that does not seem possible. Like, I have a hard time imagining all of those things happen. I feel like things would have to burn down pretty far before people would be open to a rebuilding. But I guess that's the missing link is we're going to have to live through it to know actually how this plays out. It's nice to think that we could get to this very utopian state in the future, in the next 10 to 20 years, but I don't have enough information about what that looks like and what kind of struggle we would have to go through as a society to reach that sort of state of agreement. As we consider like Howe's theory, I find myself both concerned and cautiously hopeful about what lies ahead. What also was very interesting to me is a realization when I was reading the book that regardless of whether Kamala Harris won the presidency or Donald Trump won, we were going to go through this fourth turning no matter what. I feel like that's helpful, that it isn't about which side you're on, that this is about something that we as a society have reached the end of what we have created, and we're going to have to start all over again. And there's going to have to be a crumbling away. So these systems, like I said, that we've been living in have been deliberately holding people down, and that is not going to last forever, right? That the systems are falling apart right now, and we probably want to be mindful that we could easily fall into an even deeper pit and not come out of it on the other side. I think it's important that we realize whatever crisis we're in, that we do not just assume that that is the way it's going to be for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. That is not tenable for me. That is like not even bearable. So if I can look at what we're going through as a temporary experience and not a long-term solution, I can better weather the storm. Hopefully that makes sense. Swinging toward an oligarchy or an autocracy would move us even further from our potential as a democratic society. So the challenge before us isn't choosing between flawed systems, but I'm hoping reimagining how we can create structures that truly serve the entire community rather than entrenching power in fewer hands. So I think that's what Howe's vision of the coming spring becomes, where it becomes most valuable. The breakdown of our current order doesn't have to lead to something worse. Instead, it can be an opportunity to build something better, a system that distributes prosperity more equitably, that values human beings over profit margins, that restores the social contract between government and citizens. And right now, I don't know if that's possible, but I'm just saying that's what he talks about in the book, and I would love to see that happen. So, in conclusion, The Fourth Turning is Here is offering a fascinating lens through which to view, I think, our turbulent times. And while I think we can approach his predictions with healthy skepticism, his framework is providing some comfort. It's reminding us that periods of chaos and renewal have occurred throughout history. Like this, we're not the first to go through this. We won't be the last. The book's most valuable contribution might be its emphasis on looking forward beyond the crisis to rebuild, but focusing on the coming spring. Perhaps we're better able to navigate the winter with greater resilience and purpose as we face this pivotal moment. I think it's important to reject the blatant and manipulative lies that the free market is actually free, when in actuality, it creates a system that benefits the few at the expense of the many. Let's instead imagine what it looks like when we work together and create systems that genuinely serve everyone. Like, I don't think that should be asking too much. Governments are created to do that purpose. So when they're hijacked to basically make a small subsection very wealthy and the rest struggle, like, you've got a problem. So whether you buy into the theory or not, this book definitely challenges us to think about our moment in history and our generational responsibility. Perhaps understanding these patterns can help us change and face our challenges with greater wisdom and make choices that lead to a better rebirth on the other side of whatever the crisis awaits us. And I'd love to know, like, what do you think about cyclical theories of history? Do you see evidence of Howe's fourth turning in our current moment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I can't wait to hear from you. Thanks for watching.